first of all, thank you so much and welcome to the first Your Brain On, which is focused on focus. It's certainly a hot topic right now. If you are working home from home, most of us are. So we're broadcasting from this home office to your home office or your living room or your ironing board setup, whatever it is. So being able to draw your attention to task, this will help in so many different aspects of your life that Ty will go over. So my name is Dr. Lisa Belanger. I am the CEO of ConsciousWorks. ConsciousWorks provides the necessary habit, skills, work design to create strong, agile minds at work. We go beyond education by providing behavioral support, culture shifts, leadership impact, and what is necessary to create long-term change for performance and proactive mental health. Our experts consist of behavior change specialist, certified exercise physiologist, workplace wellness, public health specialist, neuroscientist, who will be presenting to us today, so we can go unmatched in the depth and breadth of our knowledge. Ty, who's presenting today, is a new member to ConsciousWorks team, and he's excited to bring his neuroscience research experience towards promoting corporate wellness. His research focuses on the understanding of how to better assess psychological wellness so we can make more informed decisions on our approach to promoting mental health in the workplace. And he's excited to bring these analytical skills, we'll just say it nerdy skills, to the workplace roadmap so we can do assessments on how exactly your team is doing. So without further ado, please welcome our resident neuroscience nerd, Ty the neuro guy. Go ahead, Ty.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that kind introduction. I'm glad that you actually did make that mistake between Bill Nye the Science Guy and Ty the Neuro Guy, because it means that my branding is, effective.
I love it.
So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Just as we're all coming in, we're going to start actually right off the bat with an activity. One thing that I like to do with my presentations, I like to try to make them as experiential as possible. So I'm not just talking at you for the next like half hour, 45 minutes, but it's going to be a little bit more of a conversation where you're going to do a couple activities. So then that way you can link the concepts that I'm teaching you about with your own experience to help them sink in a little bit more. So I will have everyone get out a piece of paper or a text editor or an email or any way that you can easily just quickly make a few jot notes. We're going to start by doing a short 60-second meditation. And whereas normally you would get a guided meditation that's going to walk you through how to go about doing this, the goal of this one is actually for you to do some self-monitoring about your own experience while we're going through the meditation. So we'll start off with, I'll invite everybody to just take a moment and feel your breath. Just pause and be aware of the air coming in and out of your lungs. Does everybody feel your breath now? I see one person nodding. A couple people nodding. Awesome. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to start off a timer for 60 seconds, and I'm just going to get you to try to focus on your breath. Try to focus on your breath at the exclusion of all the other sensations. It might be helpful to close your eyes and to really zone in on that particular sensation. And inevitably, our minds are going to wander. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as I'm going to get into today. But the important thing is that if you do catch your mind wandering, I just want you to use your piece of paper or your text editor and just quickly jot down the fact that you did have an experience of mind wandering. And then the important thing is to return your focus back to your breath and restart the cycle. Okay? Does everybody understand so far? Seeing a few people nodding. So, all right. So let's begin. So on the count of 3, 2, 1. All right. I'll have everyone return their focus back to me, away from your breath. And just take a quick note on how many times you caught yourself mind wandering over the course of this exercise. For me personally, it was 4. Do we have anybody that was able to go through the entire 60 seconds without any mind wandering? All right, so got a lot of low single digits. Few, oh, we got a 7, 3, oh, 12. Okay. Oh, we got one person that said success, none. Awesome. So it looks like we got a wide range of focus abilities in the audience right now. Um, so what I'm going to now talk about is how this exercise relates to a little bit of neuroscience. So basically, when we try to focus, there's a cycle that happens. So there's a different series of brain networks that gets turned on throughout this process. So to start off with, you're going to have your executive network being turned on, and this is the network that activates your focused attention. So when you first started trying to pay attention to your breath, this network was lighting up. It was synchronized. It was juiced to the full. Um, but inevitably, it can't stay on for forever. So eventually, a different network is going to start turning on, and that one's referred to as the default mode network. This brain network was actually discovered by neuroimaging studies when they found that when you put people in a brain scanner and you ask them to just do nothing, just lay there, this is the network that you see a lot of activity in. And since then, a lot of research has followed up and found that this network is strongly associated with the experience of mind wandering. So when you catch your mind drifting off to something that you weren't originally focusing on or getting on tangents, this is the brain network that you can go to blame for that. But then after a period of time, you'll become aware about the fact that you were mind wandering, and this is going to trigger some activity in your salience network. So I like to think about your salience network as kind of like an alarm system. It's constantly surveying your environment around you, trying to find things that are important and interesting, possibility for threats, opportunities, food, what have you. But this is able to pick up the fact that you are mind wandering, and this actually sends signals up to your executive network. And this causes a shift in the brain activity to again return your executive network to turn on and resume that state of focus. So when a lot of people initially first start meditating, they might think that their goal is to simply try to stay in that focus state and have their executive network turned on the entire time. But as our activity just demonstrated, that's not necessarily a feasible goal, at least not right away. So instead, what is often much more important is to have your salience network turn on, to have that moment of insight, that awareness about the fact that you just caught yourself mind wandering. And when this network turns on, you get a little bit of a hit of dopamine, a little bit of reward from the fact that you just caught yourself. And this gives you that extra sense of self insight. So that's the overall cycle of focus. So when thinking about your own scores, there were a few people that had very low numbers. That might mean that you were very good at staying within the focus state and only had a couple experience of mind wandering. If your number was a little high, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that could just mean that you were very aware of your mind wandering when it did happen, and you're able to catch yourself before you went on more than a few seconds of mind wandering, and you're able to return your focus. So if your number was a little high, that's actually not necessarily a bad thing. But what I want to now talk a little bit more about is what this executive network does for us. That's composed of a number of different brain regions that I could get into, but I'm not sure if we have any other neuroscience nerds in the crowd for me to nerd out about with that. So instead, I'm going to use some memes to explain what this network does. So focus attention is what we like to call in neuroscience as a foundational cognitive function, meaning that it's something that a lot of other more complicated cognitive functions are based upon. So I'm going to go through 3 of those more complicated processes and highlight how they're really important for us in our current society, as knowledge workers, as professionals, and as a loving, caring people in our communities. So the first thing I want to talk about is the capacity for planning. So this executive functioning network was originally evolutionarily thought to be proposed for us to be able to plan out how we're going to engage in complex sequences of motor behavior. So we're going to do A, then we're going to do B, then we're going to do C. So in our current society, we've now extrapolated this a little bit, and now it's kind of more so in the form of a to-do list. So this network is really important for us to be able to plan out what we're going to do over the course of our day, over the course of the next hour. Cooking is actually another really good example of where this network comes in. If you're skilled in the kitchen, you know that there's an art, almost a science, to making sure that all the food is coordinated and comes out ready at the same time. So you can start to appreciate how having this network operating at full capacity can be really beneficial in our professional lives. Um, but just having a plan is not necessarily sufficient. So this network is also able to help us with multitasking. So, and I say multitasking with a little bit of tongue in cheek because truly we can't actually multitask. Our brain can really only focus on one thing at a time. But what we are able to do is to rapidly switch between different tasks. And this is very valuable in a lot of different settings. I want to give a quick shout out to all the mothers in the crowd right now. From my own experience, mothers tend to be exceptionally good at this particular skill, and that they're often managing multiple different things simultaneously and juggling their attention between their kids and appointments and their professional lives going back. Entrepreneurs, if there's any entrepreneurs in the crowd, this is also another network that is really crucially important for your ability to run a startup. Because oftentimes you might come into the day with a plan and then you get through emails and you're like, cool, there's a new fire that I need to put out today. And you're constantly having to juggle between where you're going to allocate your attention and you're multitasking to be more effective in your day to day operations. And then the final thing that this network is able to do for us is something called impulse inhibition. So, one way that I like to try to think about this is we've all been there where we've been watching Netflix or something, and before we know it, Netflix is already proposing that we should start watching the next episode of a series. And in the back of our mind, we know that really we should probably do a little bit of exercise. We just watched Netflix for 2.5 hours. It's time to switch it up just a little bit. But the temptation to just stay sitting and watching Netflix is there. And our executive functioning network is really important for us to overcome that tendency and to resist that urge, to resist that impulse, that inhibition, and to follow through with our exercise routine. If anyone's ever tried to follow through with a diet, this is the same brain network that prevents you from having cookies instead of salad. Um, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been guilty of accidentally having cookies for dinner. So maybe if I had cultivated this network a little bit better, I'd be able to switch that over to salad. So all these different things really kind of come together and they focus on this idea that attention is our currency. Again, if you think about the idea that attention is this foundational brain process that leads to all these other more complex ways of interacting with the world, fundamentally, it is kind of like a form of currency. In your own professions, especially if you're a knowledge worker, probably what you're paid to do is to engage this brain network to do the complex thinking, the planning, the action follow through that's specific to your role in your job. Um, and if you're able to more effectively engage this network, this actually could literally translate over into a higher paycheck. But there's another way that we can think about this attention being currency. I think is a little bit more fundamental to the human experience, in the sense that when you're interacting with another person, let's take a little bit of a break from the professional experience and think about in our own personal lives. If you're interacting with your friends or with your family, um, the ability to be completely focused on these people is really very fundamental. And if you're not able to engage your full attention in these interactions, when you're listening to kids about what they learned about during school, or you're comforting a friend who just had a recent breakup, you're not going to be able to live life completely to the fullest because you're going to have other things kind of nagging at the back of your mind if you're not able to shut off your worries about work and stuff like that. So that's why attention is our currency in many different ways. The better you're able to deploy your attention strategically and consciously and with intention, the more rich and fulfilling your life is going to be. And this has the perk of also leading towards some monetary benefits as well when you think about it from that perspective. So I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about a quote from Einstein. And this is going to be the start of some financial jokes and analogies that I'm going to be doing. So Einstein had this one quote that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays for it. So for all the people in the crowd that have a background in finance, this might make a lot of sense with respect to investing and compound interest and trying to get a rate of return, something along those lines. But again, keeping with this analogy that attention is our currency, this quote actually applies to our attention as well. And I think this actually comes from a little bit of a misunderstanding about that quote, because while it certainly does apply to our investment strategies, it's really just true of any complex biological system that's out there, whether or not that's our economic system or our ecosystems that are in the world around us, or perhaps the one that I'm most interested in, our brain. Our brain is a complex dynamical system, and it's able to tap into this feature of compound interest. So that's what I'm going to share to you over the next couple slides. So the reason why that quote applies to our brain is that our brain has the possibility to engage in what are called positive feedback loops. So we can think about this with an analogy to our own meditation experience from that exercise that we did. So initially, when I first asked you to focus on your breath, you were trying to focus, and you may or may not have been successful. That's not important. The important thing is that after doing that 60-second exercise, you had some improvement in your focus, no matter how minuscule it may have been. And you got a sense of accomplishment and reward from being able to engage in this focus. And when you get that sense of reward, especially when you have that moment of insight where you caught yourself mind wandering and you were able to do that, that's going to reinforce your desire to want to try to focus moving forward. And when you reinforce this desire trying to focus, this is going to lead to more improvements in focus, so on and so forth. And the reason why we call this a positive feedback loop is that with every iteration of this cycle, you get just a little bit more of an amplitude of this cycle going on, such that after a few times, it's going to start to look like this, where now you have much more capacity to try to focus, so that when you do that, you're going to have larger improvements in your focus when you try to deploy that. And once you have this a sense of mastery, the rewards that you're going to get from your meditation experiences are going to be much higher. And again, this is going to reinforce your desire to try to focus. So this is this idea of a positive feedback loop is something that we see in multiple different areas of nature. So I'm just highlighting this one particular instance with our brain. But again, going back to the finance analogy, does anybody happen to recognize what this formula is? Any finance nerds in the crowd? Time value of money? Yeah, that's one way to phrase it. There we go. It looks like a formula to to calculate compound interest. So this is where I'm going to make that other leap towards finance. So to all you people who are not math nerds in the crowd, this might not be the most exciting way to try to understand that quote. So instead, what we can do is we can graph this out, because I personally find this a lot more intuitive to try to understand. So when we look at it this way, you can see that initially there's going to be a period of time where you're not really going to have much of a return on your focus investment. You're going to be meditating, you're going to be trying to allocate your focus to your breath, and it's not really going to be going anywhere very quickly. But then there's going to be a period of time where you're able to reach this inflection point where suddenly you get this critical mass where suddenly your brain networks are now communicating much more effectively, much more synchronistically, and you're going to get that critical mass, and suddenly you're going to see an explosion of your capacity for focus. And this is really what we're trying to get at with our meditation practice, is we're trying to get towards that critical mass. And there's a few different strategies that we can use for trying to get there. So one strategy is to put a really big investment up front. So this could be something like doing a meditation retreat or some other very in-depth experience that's basically functioning as, putting in a large principle into this formula so that you can get to that inflection point a lot quicker. One critique of this approach is that it might not be the most sustainable way. So one other way that you could go about doing this is just investing a little bit into your focus practice every day. So this could be as simple as meditating for 5 minutes. At ConsciousWorks, we like to do this over a cup of coffee. Just really focus on the experience, the sensation of drinking your coffee. And if you do this over a period of time, eventually you're going to be able to tap into the dynamic nature of your brain, and you're going to get that return on your investment of focus. And depending on what strategy you use, you're going to reach that critical mass at different points in time. And it's not important how quickly you get there. All that matters is that you will get there eventually. And the more you're able to invest in your focus practice up front, the faster you're going to get there. But at the same time, we're all busy professionals. We've got a lot of different things vying for our time. So there's no judgment in how long it takes you to get there. But if you're patient, I assure you, you will get there. So with that being said, let's do another round of this activity. So it's exactly the same thing as before. To anyone that recently joined, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to feel your breath. Just take a moment and become aware of the air going in and out of your lungs. And every time that you notice that your mind has drifted away from your breath, just take a quick note with some paper or a text editor or something like that, just so you can keep track of it. Okay. So we'll begin this one in three, two, one. All right. So just before we move on to the next section, I just want to, if people want to type in the chat, did your number go up or down, or did it stay the same? Got one person said it went down, -1, down, down. Oh, we have one person that said that it went up. A couple people went up. One person acknowledged that they it went up, but that's because of distractions such as like kids and someone coming into their space. Yeah. So it looks like overall we had a general trend for people to have less mind wandering this time around relative to last time, with a couple instances where they might have increased. So again, thinking about the cycle of focus, we can start to map on our own experience to the neuroscience that underlies the generation of this experience. So basically, it looks like a lot of people were able to either stay more within that focus state, or they're able to cycle much more rapidly through the cycle. So then that way, if they do start mind wandering, they're able to get back to the state of focus much more rapidly. So that's exactly the way that I was hoping this demonstration would start to turn out, is that overall we would see that there would be some decreases. So up until this point, we've really talked about focus as though it's something that's beneficial for your professional career, something that's better for your productivity and your ability to manage different components of life. So for this last little bit of the webinar, I want to again, I want to switch topic a little bit and talk about how focus can be really good for proactive mental health. And to do that, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the default mode network and what happens when we're mind wandering. So depression is a very complex disorder that has a lot of biological factors and a lot of psychosocial things that contribute towards it. But one particular feature of depression that I want to talk about is what's known as rumination. And basically, it's as this meme describes, depression is calculating what you did wrong yesterday. A lot of people, if they might have a predisposition for depression, when they start mind wandering, their mind is initially going to start drifting towards all the different things that might have happened yesterday that was aversive in some capacity. For me, I'm always worried about whether or not I was socially awkward in this interaction, or whether or not I offended somebody with that meme or this meme. So those are the kinds of things that my brain will often naturally start kind of drifting towards if I start mind wandering. But the important thing to think about is that this rumination is really a past orientated emotion. That in order to engage in this rumination, you have to think about the past. And this is in contrast to anxiety, which is a future orientated emotion. So basically, when you're anxious, it's like the most interesting man in the world. I don't always worry about tomorrow, but when I do, I worry all day long. Um, and in this case, anxiety is the future orientated counterpart to depression. So in depression, whereas you're focusing on the past, for anxiety, you're worrying about what could possibly happen in the future. And sometimes that might be valid worry in the sense it's a likely thing that could happen, but sometimes it might not be as likely, in which case that worry might not actually be advantageous or adaptive. But the important thing is that across both anxiety and depression is that you're not paying attention to the present moment. Whereas when you're focusing, when you're doing a meditation, by definition, your brain is aware of the current state of your body. And in order to do that, you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future. So if you ever catch yourself slipping into a moment where you're ruminating about what was happening yesterday, or you're anxious about what might be happening over the course of the next couple days, I invite you to just take 60 seconds, go through that meditation exercise, and you'll be able to start to snap out of it because you're literally pulling your brain out of that default mode network activity and reactivating your executive functioning network to get back to the present moment and back to all those wonderful things that focus is able to ascribe to us. So before we go towards the Q&A, I want to do this exercise just one more time. So this is intentional for a number of different reasons. Um, so it's possible that the decreases we found over the last exercise, they could just be one-offs. We don't really know. We know that things naturally fluctuate. So if we really want to ensure that that I can demonstrate this proof of principle, that by practicing this exercise repeatedly, that you'll be able to decrease your mind wandering and stay in the focus more, we're going to do just one more time to see if we can keep that trend going. So again, I'm going to invite everyone to just take a moment and find your breath. Again, just become aware of the air coming in and out of your lungs and your belly expanding and contracting with each and every breath. And again, for anyone that might have just joined the call, just use a piece of paper or a text editor to keep track of any mind wandering that happens when and if it occurs. And then, of course, just return back to your breath. Okay. So we'll begin in 3, 2, 1. All right, I'll get everybody to return their attention back to me. And then again, I'll just have people type into the chat quickly. Did your score go up or down relative to the very first time you did it? Was it a continued downward trend or did it kind of plateau after the second one? We have one person with no change, mostly some down, couple that stayed the same. Yeah. So I'll leave it up to everybody to interpret their own trajectories. But again, the point that we're trying to illustrate is that, again, even with a very short 60-second meditation and just doing it 3 times over the course of the 45 minutes of this presentation, we are able to see objective, quantifiable changes in our mind wandering tendencies. So that's kind of a little bit of a proof of principle that that these exercises do work. Um, so just to recap what we've been talking about so far before we switch into the Q&A, I really want to focus on, ironically, that cycle of focus that I was talking about, where you start off with having your attention focused on a particular locus. In this case, I was asking you to do your breath, but it could be any number of different things. And inevitably, your mind is going to start drifting off. Your default mode network is going to turn on. And that's going to happen for a period of time. And that's okay. That's natural. But then after a while, your salience network is going to be tuned into the fact that that's happening. And it's going to reshift your focus and turn your executive functioning network back on so we can re-engage and focus. And the finance analogy that I use a number of times could really be summarized as the power of small repetitive behaviors. Over the course of this webinar, we were able to see some objective changes in our focus with those three exercises. And this is really evidence for that positive feedback loop, where the more that you're able to, practice this, the more you're able to get. And while some people might have plateaued over the 60 seconds, if you're to do a 5 or a 10-minute meditation, you can start to see these effects accumulating a lot more rapidly. And then finally, is that if you're able to take these activities and start incorporating them into your daily life a little more, you're literally proactively putting your brain in a space to become more resilient to different kinds of mental health challenges. Again, because rumination and depression, as well as anxiety and worry, those are past and future orientated emotions. And by definition, if you return your focus to the present moment, to what you're currently experiencing right now, your brain physically can't engage in those types of processes. So that's one way that you can use this as a way to try to buff yourself with respect to mental health a little bit. Of course, this isn't going to solve all those problems, but at least it's going to put you in a place where you can be a little bit more resilient when things do come around. So, with that being said, I'll turn it back to Lisa.
Thank you so, so much. I think it's one of those fundamental skills, as you just addressed. It is a cornerstone to our proactive mental health and what we can do there, and then certainly to our performance. We are going to wrap up and give people a little break before whatever the next thing is. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. ConsciousWorks offers workshops and self-paced courses, and certainly if you're more interested in learning greater detail about your focus, we have a course. We have a course for that. Follow us on ConsciousWorks for any more information. And thank you so much for joining us. If you have any further questions, by all means, reach out and we'll talk to you soon.
Uh, Again, thank you everyone so much for joining.
Thanks, guys.